Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This week we're talking about a model that we found very useful, very helpful, and a lot of other people have found this model useful in the context of relationships. The model is called the 5 Love Languages. It comes from a book by Gary Chapman. It's a New York Times bestseller. You might have heard of it. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list for a very long time. And in the book, Gary Chapman outlines the different types of love languages that people give and receive love through. So he talks about the differences. You know, you and your lover may express love in different ways, and you may receive love in different ways. And so in this book, he gives a very basic model of these 5 love languages that we thought we just discussed today on the podcast, and just give you some food for thought on these and how maybe you're expressing them in your intimate lover relationship and how your lover's expressing that back. And it extends beyond just lover relationships. It's friends and family as well. But in particular, we're talking about in relationship, that lover relationship with a spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. These love languages are very powerful. It's a very powerful frame.
I like the idea of the metaphor of different languages, because if you break that down and look at, let's just take 5 random different languages, like English, Spanish, French, German, and Finnish, right? And you put 5 people who speak these different languages in a room together, and if they're forced to communicate, they will find different ways to do it. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it will come out through pantomimes, or it will come out through pointing at things, or drawing pictures, or trying to find commonalities in the language. You're not going to really get a sense of intimacy from anybody, though.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're going to have the ability to communicate basic things to the other person, and it feels really good when you know that each person is really trying to communicate, right? Like, so that there's a feeling of good intent in that scenario. But you're not going to really be able to form any true intimacy unless you get to a point where 2 of these people or more can actually speak the native tongue of the other, right? Like if you get to a point where now you can officially speak the language, now you can truly convey ideas and concepts. Now you can truly convey abstractions and really get down to the heart of what's going on in another person. But if you never get to that point, it's going to be a lot of smiling and nodding and pointing at stuff.
Yeah.
Now let's take this metaphor and bring it into a relationship of 2 people who do speak the same language. Let's pretend English. But they have 2 different love languages, as in they, like you mentioned, communicate and receive love in a specific language that could be different than the other person. So even though you're both speaking English, you might have 2 people who are basically, they're left to pointing at things and drawing pictures and pantomiming and hoping for the other person's good intent in trying to understand them when they're trying to convey the deepest emotion of love.
I think what this really comes down to is awareness. When you're in a room with someone who speaks an actual physical, verbal language that's different than yours, you realize you're both speaking a different language. And so you accommodate. Both of you are going to come to the table and work really hard to try to accommodate that. And again, like you said, unless you're actually on the same page in language, it's going to have a lot of prevention for intimacy, a lot of misunderstandings. And with the metaphor of extending that to love languages, what's interesting is we're often unaware that we're speaking different languages. So we don't come to the table with the same intent. We don't come to the table with the same attempt to understand the person from their perspective, and we don't come to the table trying to speak the language that they understand the best because of that lack of awareness. So that awareness piece is also very critical in this part.
Oh, totally. Yeah. If you know that you're speaking a different language than another person, like I said, there's a lot of smiling and nodding going on, right? And going, shrugging and going, okay, well, I don't really know what you're saying. And I'm not going to assume you're a bad person because I don't know what you're saying. I'm just going to assume that we're going to have limitations in what we can convey to each other. If you don't know that, though, you think the other person is just being really obnoxious. And you can see that in actual languages. Like when somebody has, say, moved to the United States from a different country, and they have very limited English skills, right? And you'll see other people, like in the grocery store, assume that the person is being rude, or they're assuming that the other person is being, arrogant or pig-headed, when the person just can't speak English. And you don't know that, and you're assuming all sorts of bad intent. So like you said, in that relationship context, if 2 people are speaking different love languages, and the other person doesn't know that, anytime you have your love needs going unmet, as in you're seeking from your spouse, right? From the person that you are spending your life with, you're seeking from them a sign of love, and they're speaking a different language, so they're trying to give it to you, but it is just like, it is verbs and nouns and adjectives that are going way over your head, so to speak, right? Using the metaphor. Then you're going to actually believe that the person is denying or withholding love from you.
Yeah.
You're going to think that the other person has ill intent in the relationship. So really understanding this model of the 5 love languages, I think, is super powerful. And let's go over them. Let's talk about what those 5 different love languages are.
Absolutely. So the first one that Chapman outlines in the book is called words of affirmation. This is expressing your love through verbal, affirming words, talking about how you appreciate the person, words of appreciation, words of affirmation, how proud you are of them, how they delight you, the words you use, maybe a nickname you call them, something that's between the two of you that's very intimate. It's part of that verbal interplay. And you're affirming them through support, through the way you speak about them to them and also about them in public. You affirm them to other people. You're at a dinner party and you talk about how great your lover or spouse is in front of other people. It makes them feel great. So that's a way that love can be expressed through words of affirmation is the first one.
When we go through all 5 of them, they're all going to feel really obvious, as in like, well, yeah, who doesn't say words of affirmation? When you look at the other side of the coin, there are a lot of people who say things like talk is cheap.
Yeah.
Right? Like if their love language is something different and their mates or their spouse's love language is words of affirmation, it doesn't matter how much that person talks them up because they're going to think talk is cheap.
Yeah.
They're looking for a different expression of love. And so all of them are going to, as we go through all 5 of these, they're all going to feel like, yeah, of course, that's how you show love. But we're talking about what somebody's primary love language is. What is the marker that they're looking for that indicates that they're experiencing love or receiving love from their spouse?
Yeah.
And what are they using to give love? And so if you're a words of affirmation person, that means you might be talking up your spouse like crazy and you're looking for them to talk you up. And if they're not talking you up because they may be a person who thinks that words are cheap or they, talk is cheap, or they're the kind of person who isn't particularly verbose, maybe they're incredibly introverted, then when they withhold those words of affirmation from you, or you'll see it as withholding, they won't see it as withholding, they'll just see it as not offering because it's not important to them. But if you don't get what you're looking for, then you're going to have a tendency to see that as withholding from you because it's so natural for you to say it. You're going to overvalue your experience. You're going to think it's very natural for people to talk in words of affirmation. So if somebody's not doing it, that must mean that they're deliberately not doing it or withholding. And that's going to be a sign that they don't love you. So as we go through all 5 of them, when you hear them and you go, well, yeah, obviously everybody loves that. Don't think of it in terms of an obvious, yeah, people like that. Think of it in terms of a hierarchy. Yeah. If somebody's words of affirmation communication is at the bottom of the list, then that means you're not going to see it from them. And if it's at the top of your list, that means that you're going to see it as the other person withholding it from you. Yeah,
I think hierarchy is important to see these ranking as we list through these. As we talk through these, just start to notice maybe some of the ones that are coming up for you. Usually, I found people usually have about 2 that are primary. 1 or 2. 1 is really dominant. The second is almost fairly dominant. And the other 3 are kind of, they flow in and out, give or take, depending. But usually there's 2 that emerge as your primary way that you give and receive love. So the second one, words of affirmation is number 1. The second one is quality time. And this is really about spending time with the other person. A lot of amount of time. It could be sitting and just quietly sitting on the couch watching television next to them, or you're both cleaning the house together, or you're both cooking together, or you're taking long drives, or you're sitting, one person sitting and watching something, the other person sitting and reading, and maybe not even having communication with that person, but just being present around that person. There are people that express and receive love in this way by the quality of time they spend with their lover or their mate. So that's the second one, is quality time. The third one is gift giving or receiving gifts. Somebody that, expresses love by going and finding that perfect thing that will make this person happy and purchasing it for them or making that gift for them, wrapping it up, making it very a special occasion to give that gift or to receive that gift from someone is how love can be expressed. I love the fact this person got me this knick-knack or this thing. This expresses love to me. Gift giving is the third love language. The fourth is acts of service. So this is doing a service for someone else. You're actually putting yourself out there. Maybe it's doing the dishes or vacuuming the floors or getting the oil changed in the car or bringing breakfast in bed or cleaning something up or taking care of something that needed to be taken care of. This person wanted. That's how they can give or receive love.
Or working hard to provide for your family.
Exactly.
Yeah. So like the breadwinner working hard to make sure that, their family has their financial needs taken care of.
So acts of service is the fourth love language. And then number 5 is physical touch, expressing love through touching and physicality, putting your arm around, hugs, back rubs, kisses, affection, snuggling. Oftentimes this can be confused with sexual expression of love, which I think most people in a loving relationship, in a lover relationship, enjoy sexual expression of love. This is beyond just the sexual experience, which can also be a physical touch, giving and receiving a love. This is more about the way you touch your lover, the way they touch you, and that touch means so much to someone that gives and receives love through touch. So that's the 5th love language.
Yeah, it can also be things like hand-holding in public.
Yes.
Indicating that you're not embarrassed of, that you're proud to be with your mate because you're holding their hand in public.
Kissing them in public.
That's right. So physical touch doesn't just have to be like the physical intimacy between two people. It can also be sort of like a public expression that you're happy to be with this person because you're touching them in an intimate way, out in public.
And all 5 of these could be outwardly expressed in public on behalf of other people. So they can see, your lover can see that you're expressing love in this way in front of others. You could be spending quality time holding hands, walking through the mall, or you could be doing an act of service for them in front of other people. So they see that, oh, wow, I'm valued. This person's not embarrassed to do an act of service for me or hold my hand or spend quality time or whatever that love expression is. It could be done publicly.
Yeah, well, like with quality time, it could be, I'm sorry, I can't go hang out with my group of friends because I'm going to spend time at home with my mate.
Absolutely.
So it could be an expression like you're willing to deny other people your quality time publicly in order to spend time with your spouse.
So just to recap, the 5 love languages are words of affirmation, quality time, gift giving and receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch.
So what's really fascinating about all of these, especially, when you list them out, generally 1 or 2 stands out to you. There's 2 major things I think that are so powerful about this model. And I do recommend, by the way, getting Gary Chapman's book. It's really good. There's a lot of anecdotes in it. There's a lot of, expressions of this, nuance to how this can be expressed or received by your spouse. So I do recommend the book. The book is great.
There's also a test in the book to test for your love language too, like a little self-assessment.
Right. And sometimes we actually get it wrong. Like Joel mentioned with the physical touch one, a lot of men think it's physical touch because they assume that their sexual need falls under physical touch. The sexual need is not necessarily a love language. Sexual need is, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I don't think we've done a podcast on Maslow yet. We should probably do one soon. And probably by the time you're hearing this, we may have done one, or we will soon, on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, sex is like one of the what we call the basement needs. Sex falls under the category of like survival. It's equivalent to making sure that you've got a roof over your head that night or you've got food in your belly. The sex need is very important for humans in general. So just because you have a sex need doesn't mean that that's necessarily your love language. Physical touch would be more, as Joel mentioned, those expressions, those intimate expressions of like gentle caresses, hand holding, that sort of thing. So as you're listening to these 5, 1 or 2 might stand out to you as like, that's your love language, for sure. But it's really, the important thing is to see a contrast between your love language and your mate's love language if they are different. Because there's going to be a lot of cross wires. One that stands out to me all the time, whenever I see this list of 5, is I think, what if you're a quality time person and your mate is an acts of service person? Mm-hmm. So your mate is out there working hard for the family, doing stuff for you, like basically running around trying to show you love in all these different expressions of service. And all you really want them to do is sit down and hang out with you for a couple hours, right? Can you imagine the cross wires that would happen? Like, I'm working so hard for this family. How can you not see that as an expression of love? And the other person's like, why don't you ever come home? Why don't you ever just sit with me? Why don't you ever just, really show some quality time with me? And man, that cross wire can be big.
And they feel unappreciated. I'm out here doing all this acts of service, providing for the family. You keep trying to derail me from showing you love by getting me to spend time with you. And here I'm out. I'm working hard. I come home in the evenings. I want to go get the oil change in the car. I want to make sure I do the dishes for you. I want to make sure, if it's a breadwinner is a male and the female's at home with kids or whatever, I want to make sure I put the kids to bed that night to really show you that I love you. And maybe she's like saying, well, that's all nice and good, but man, I just really want you to sit down, have a cup of tea, and can I read a book and put my feet up on your lap while you watch, sports or something? And that way we can spend time near each other. And it's just not happening. And then he feels like he's not valued for all the stuff he's doing. And she feels like he just doesn't care because he's not taking the time with her. And now, man, there might be a fight that happens or disagreement or misunderstanding or I'm not loved. This person doesn't love me anymore because they don't give me what I need. And then you start to see a rift, a break apart of the relationship. And that's the first inroads to a downward spiral. And you don't want that to happen. So how can we start looking at this in more of a proactive way?
Yeah. I also think of gift givers or people who receiving gifts are their love language. If you're not a gifts person and your mate is, that can sometimes be insulting. Like you're looking for markers of love and the person gives you a gift. What are you trying to do? Buy me off?
Yeah.
Right? Like there are so many possibilities for misinterpreting these expressions of love. I could see all 5 of them being misinterpreted. Words of affirmation. We'll talk is cheap. Quality time. Well, we never do anything together. You just want to hang out. What are you, like, lonely? Or I'm just the person that, is filling your day? For receiving gifts, what are you trying to do? Buy me off, right? Acts of service, you're always gone, right? Like what, you don't love me? You don't want to spend any time around me? And physical touch, oh, okay, so it always comes down to sex.
Yeah.
So all 5 of them can be grossly misinterpreted if they are not your love language. All 5 of them can be seen as actually acts of lack of love if they are not your love language. You told me with your first relationship, you guys got separated. You guys were separated twice, divorced the second time you were separated. But when you were separated the first time, you were on a business trip to San Francisco and you found a pair of earrings that you thought that, your first wife would have really liked. And you brought them back and you gave them to her. And you told me that was when you guys got back together because she thought it was so thoughtful that you would bring her a gift that was, that really was her.
I don't know if that was the reason we got back together specifically, but that was one of the things that softened both of us toward each other again in trying to work out some relationship differences.
Right. It was like a catalyst.
Yeah, we could have been a catalyst. It was definitely at that time period, and it was one of the nodes in the system that created an emergence of us getting back together.
Right. And for me, gift giving is not, or receiving gifts is not my love language at all. So if you did that for me, I would have been like, oh, okay, thanks. And it would have been meaningless for the most part.
But for me, actually, gift giving is not my primary love language either. I just happen to almost casually do this, and it meant a lot to the other person. And I kind of almost in a surprising way, because I just don't think about gifts in the same way that I think other people that have this as their love language think of it. I love getting gifts, and I appreciate giving gifts, but it's just not how I give and receive love. It's just not on my radar. Like, it doesn't come naturally to me.
I think everybody can understand all 5.
Absolutely.
It's just whether or not it has significant meaning to you as an act of intimacy. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I'm an acts of service person. Right? If I love you, I'm constantly doing for you, right? Like, what can I do? Tell me what I can do. And I think I came home one day. Actually, this has happened a couple of different times. This happens actually quite frequently, which is probably why we have a pretty good relationship. But I'll come home and, like, you'll have clean the bathroom. And I'm like, holy crap, you clean the bathroom. And that is the best gift you can give me. Like, you clean the bathroom? Holy crap, you clean the bathroom. And I like go on and on about how amazing it is that you clean the bathroom or whatever it is. Like, you bring me a morning smoothie every morning for the most part, right? Sometimes I'll make the smoothie, but you are usually the person who makes smoothies, and you bring me a cup of coffee in the morning. I like, you basically have solidified our relationship for yet another day. Our relationship lives another day because you've brought me a smoothie. Just these acts of service are so impactful for me. They're so profound. And I'm an acts of service person, right? Like, I jump into action and I want to do things for you. And that's my symbol of love. If a person is a quality time person, which I've had relationships with quality time people in the past, and they are so upset with me because I won't just sit down, right? Like, it's hard for me to just sit down and have, like, hang out time.
Not even talk necessarily, just sit there.
Right. Exactly. Just sit there.
while they're surfing the web and you're doing your activity, but just being next to the person.
Just sitting next to them. To me, I cannot even imagine how that would be a symbol of love. Now, I love good conversation. Quality time, as far as I'm concerned, is sitting down and having a super high quality conversation. That I'll do endlessly. But just sitting there while you're surfing the web and I'm surfing the web or playing a video game or we're just happen to occupy the same space, that doesn't mean to me what it means to a quality time person.
Yeah.
So there could be a lot of cross wires there. So it's really a matter of diagnosing, okay, so what's my love language? What's your love language? And where are we where are wires getting crossed? Where am I seeing your acts of love, right? Like your expressions of love? How am I misinterpreting them as selfishness? Because I think that's what we do. The opposite of showing love is an act of selfishness. How am I misinterpreting your act of love as somehow being selfish? And how can I start to understand this is you showing me love? This is you expressing to me that you have appreciation and love for me, and I should not be bastardizing that by going, oh, well, you just have a need going unmet.
Mm-hmm. Well, and at the same time, attempting to speak your partner's love is also a good strategy. So perspective to say, this person's showing me, they keep getting me gifts. They don't mean anything to me, but I wonder if that's my mate's love language. I wonder if they express love through gift giving. And I bet if I started to give them gifts, that might really make a difference. You test it. You give them a gift and it really works well. They give a great feedback to that. It's like, wow, this expressed something to them I didn't even realize that would express to them. I'm going to definitely make this a point to do more.
Oh, yeah. I remember hearing, this is secondhand, but I remember hearing a guy that heard about the 5 love languages for the first time. And he got this like dawning comprehension over his face. And he said, had I known about this model in my first marriage, we would never have divorced, because she was a gift giver. Mm-hmm. And she would bring home what he assumed was meaningless crap all the time. She was always giving him these like stupid little trinkets, or like, this is his interpretation, right? His interpretation was quote unquote meaningless, stupid trinkets. And he thought she was a compulsive shopper.
Yeah.
So they would get in arguments all the time about how she was just spending all their money and she was a compulsive shopper and what's wrong with her. And she would be like, she's like, I'm sorry, I'm a compulsive shopper. I don't know why I'm doing this, right? Like, I don't know why I keep buying stuff for you. I'm not sure why. And it fundamentally broke their marriage up. And he realized in retrospect, I ended our marriage based on her expressions of love.
Yeah.
I mean, what a moment, right?
So another thing that we've noticed actually together, we've talked about this, is the idea that this gets a little bit more nuanced with the model, the 5 love language model, but oftentimes the language you give love outward to the other person is not necessarily the language you receive love from another person. Now, typically it can be the same. Like, I'm a words of affirmation person. I tend to give love through words of affirmation and really appreciate when I get words of affirmation. But there are other things I do that, and I think we all do, we give love in a certain way that we don't necessarily receive back in the same way. So you can often give your mate miscommunication by giving love in a certain way but not receiving it. So they're going to interpret, okay, this is how this person's expecting to receive love. They're giving me gifts. They must be a gift giver. That's how they receive love. Then you start getting gifts, but it doesn't mean as much to you. You appreciate them to some degree because you're a gift giver, but receiving them isn't as important as maybe acts of service. In fact, this would be for you. You are definitely somebody that appreciates acts of service back.
Oh, totally. Yeah. No, I receive acts of service. I would say physical touch is pretty important to me too. Words of affirmation is probably my third, and then, on down the line. Receiving gifts might be the bottom for me. It might be the absolute fifth one for me when it comes to receiving love. Like, if somebody gives me a gift, I'm grateful, but it's like, oh, okay, thanks, right? Like, it doesn't really, it's not like this big deal. However, I have learned that I love giving gifts.
Yeah. So
for, say, Christmas time, I will spend a lot of time and effort and thought into which gifts that I give every person. Like, I created a gift-giving guide recently during the Christmas holiday. I created a gift-giving guide because of all the time and effort that I spend in really, like, first figuring out the person's personality type, understanding what I know about their personality type, understanding what, I know about the individual beyond just their type, and giving them the perfect gift. It's, like, very important for me. And it is a way that I express love to other people. But when I'm opening gifts, I'm not like tearing open the wrapping paper all excited for what I'm getting. I'm like, oh, okay, that's right. I get gifts too. It's almost like I forget. And I'll spend all this time and effort in wrapping them. It's a very, for my personality type, I don't know if it's super common for people to spend as much time wrapping gifts, but I find it to be something that my backseat passengers in the car model, right? Like the childlike part of my personality really delights in it.
Mm-hmm.
It probably is going to go away after a time period. I'll probably just, get to the point where everybody else is, where they just like slap some wrapping paper on something and hand it off. But right now, the less developed part of me really delights in making the package beautiful, and like I'll hang ornaments on it, and it's like this big deal, right? And I realize that that's all part of me expressing love to family members, right? To family members and friends, that I think it's just really important for me to be able to express love through those gifts. Do not receive love in the same way, right? If somebody tries to get me the perfect gift, and even if they hit it spot on, I'm impressed, but it's not like, oh man, this person must really love me to be able to do this. It's just not, it just doesn't trigger the same thing. But an act of service, if somebody goes out of their way for me, I believe I'm cherished. That is a sign that person cherishes me and truly loves me. And so the way that we receive love and the way that we show or give love, that actually might be different too. And that might create some crosswires. So diagnosing not just what you and your mate are, but what your receiving and also your giving language is, and your mate's receiving language and giving language, right? Like now it adds a whole nother layer to how complex it can get. But at the same time, if you can really nail it down, I think it's so major. It's so major to be able to nail down those components.
Yeah. So one exercise that you can do, and I'm sure that, if you read the book, you're going to have some exercises and some techniques to go through this self-evaluation, but just a quick exercise right now to get started the next 10 minutes. Just jot down the 5 love languages. Jot down words of affirmation, quality time, gift giving, acts of service, physical touch, and rate yourself, 1 to 5, which is number 1, which is number 5. Put them in a hierarchy structure. And then take some moment to think about your mate, the person that you're in a loving relationship with, and do the same for them. And guess what theirs is. If they're willing to sit down and talk with you about it, have them make their own list, and you guys have a discussion about the way you give and receive love. It can be a powerful conversation for your relationship, because it's going to open up a whole new dialogue of how you can take your relationship to the next level by speaking the language that your lover understands and really resonates with, feels like, man, I feel loved by this person. And that's really what we want in a relationship. We want to be able to express love and have the person that we're in love with express love back to us. And it's a two-way back and forth communicative experience.
And to be able to interpret these expressions of love the way that they're intended, to understand that if somebody is expressing love in a way that's unfamiliar to us, that they have positive intent. Mm-hmm. This is an attempt for them to show intimacy, as opposed to them being self-serving and just doing something to feed their own need, which is, I think, a lot of times where the misinterpretation comes in. And I do actually recommend buying the book if you haven't already. There's a lot of nuance to these 5 love languages. There might be components to how they're shown, how, like, say, quality time. I would have interpreted quality time as good, quality conversation, because that's how I experience quality time. Whereas another person can experience quality time by just simply being in the same room with their loved one. So being able to get how the nuance works, how the different languages are expressed, even almost like subdialects, the book really comes up with some of these really cool subdialects and markers to look out for with your mates and, even with yourself. And I feel like the more we can see positive intent from our mates, the more that we can understand that they really do have us in mind. They want to build intimacy. We so often feel so alone as human beings, and our ego feels really insecure about our ability to, say, keep our mates, or our ability to maintain intimacy with our mates. And so it can sometimes create demons and monsters that aren't actually there. Being able to understand a model like love languages helps remove some of that insecurity. It helps remove some of those monsters that we might have manufactured that weren't there to begin with. So it's a really powerful model, I think, for maintaining the intimacy that you have with your mate, and then also building intimacy if you've lost some of it.
And if you're in a dating situation, you're in the process of selecting a mate, or you're casually dating someone right now and you're wanting to get them to know them better, there's a great conversation during that initial dating experience. Like, hey, so how do you give and receive love? And it's a great discussion. The person that you're in a quasi burgeoning romantic relationship with, it's an interesting conversation. It's about the two of you. It can create some intimacy in and of itself. And you get to know where that person's coming from before you enter into a long-term relationship with them to see if you're compatible, because this matters. I mean, if you're drastically incompatible, it's going to take a lot more effort and work. It can be done, but you're going to have to put a lot more concentrated effort and work into mismatchings of love languages than if you have some similarities in how you give and receive love. It's going to come more naturally for you to show each other love in a relationship. So this is a great initial conversation. Not when you first meet somebody. Like, so what's your love language? But like in the process of dating them, in the process of discovering whether or not you want to continue developing more intimacy with this person, it's a great place and a great conversation to have with them to discover more about yourself and more about them and how you guys operate together. We want to hear your stories. You have a story around this. I know you do. You're listening. You've got a story around you and a loved one in a lover relationship. Maybe it's a current relationship, a past relationship, where either your love language is matched perfectly and you've got a story around how that was a wonderful experience, or they were mismatched and you learned something through that. I want to hear your story, and Tony wants to hear your story. Come over to facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack. Facebook's going to give you an opportunity to put more story in there, or you can leave a comment under this podcast at personalityhacker.com. It would be a great experience for all of us to see some of the stories that you have and really understand how people are experiencing this. Because I think this idea of these love languages is powerful in relationship. And I think stories are powerful for people to really understand how other people's experiences mirror their own. So come over and tell us your story. We want to hear from you.
And if you love our podcast, go to iTunes and rate us, please. Leave some feedback if you'd like. Let us know how we're doing in a review. And I really feel like being able to share your review and share your rating is pretty high leverage for other people looking for the podcast, and then to be able to let us know what you'd like to hear more of.
See, we both are words of affirmation, so we want you to show us love by coming over and affirming us by saying, hey, I love the podcast, and here's why.
I'm an acts of service person. This would be an act of service.
See, it hits both.
It really does, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So come over to personalityhacker.com, join the community, be a part of this every week by subscribing to this podcast. We'd love to be a part of the discussion with you on a regular basis. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode.